right. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll rock and roll here. We'll get going and just kind of jump in and kind of go from there. You guys want to introduce yourselves and talk about who you are? Jimmy, you're our guest of honor. You want to go first?
Jimmy, you go ahead. Jimmy Patiño.
All right.
Thanks for inviting me, Jason, to talk about the film. Good to be in community with you and in space with you, Jimmy. I'm Jimmy Patiño. I teach at the University of Minnesota. I'm in Chicano and Latino studies. I'm a historian. I've written on the Chicano movement, social movements generally, solidarity building, things like that, and grew up watching Blood In, Blood Out. So this is exciting.
I'm Jimmy Baca, and I was pretty confused about that. I thought it was I normally don't do anything like interviews and stuff. So this is I thought this was affiliated with some guy in Los Angeles who was wanting to do a radio thing, but I guess that was something else. And but I'm here now, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Patiño, because one of the pet appreciations that I have are for the Chicano scholars who are in those Chicano studies doing the work that they're doing, because to me, it is probably some of the most important work that we're doing in contemporary scholarship, is the work that you all are doing, the scholars, because there's so much to uncover, there's so much to reveal. When I was reading Diaz's book on the conquest, or when the Cornwallis went away, that book, I realized, holy mackerel, man, there's so much here that none of the Chicano people really know, or they're not in education, they're not in curriculum, they're not in lesson plans. So it's an honor to be here with you. And Jason, likewise, for you to put something together like this, I'm glad I came on.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. One of the things we wanted to be able to do here is really kind of broaden the audience here and talk a lot about diversity and do a lot of different kinds of history out here. And, Blood In, Blood Out has so much to say about Chicano history, about Los Angeles, about the 70s, the 80s, and like a lot of guys, Jimmy and I were talking before we came on about how much this film, like a lot of us have reflected on this film in the last several years. And, as I read, as I kind of prepped up for this pod, I was kind of reading about what this movie means to so many people. And, it's the cultural relevance of your work, Jimmy. It's just like, you're the first screenwriter we've had on Historians of the Movies podcast. And the entire idea behind this is to really take film and then historicize it and talk about what this really means. And I couldn't be happier to have somebody on here like yourself, whose work is really just, meant so much to so many different types of people. And I think that's really what we wanted to kind of talk about, was really your work as this primary source of history, So I'm giddy that you're here today. So I'm glad you're here, man.
It's hard for me to put it in it's hard for me to put Blood In, Blood Out it's hard for me to frame it in a historical sense, because culturally I can do it, but I had a problem because I was primarily a novelist, essayist, poet, and when they asked me to write it, it took a while for me to agree to do it. But one of the main conditions was that we drive the narrative from our point of view, and that was important for me. And also promised from Taylor, the director, that we not water it down, and that we not compromise the point of view, because when I got to thinking about it, the cultural aspects of the film and the violence and the betrayals and the family, I guess my one thing was to try to be as closest to reality as it was, because so many times it's so far away from what we really experience. And I think that the reason people like the film, and apparently they do, because the first printing of the book, I don't know if you've seen the book, but it's a mind-blowing book. Have you read it? It's incredible, right? That book is amazing, right?
Ordered it.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Wait till you see it. It's going to blow you away, dude. We've sold out the first and second printings in the last 2 months, and they're gone. and he ordered 2 more bulk deliveries via container ships. They have to come all the way from Europe and stuff. But I was pretty shocked. And then when we went to the LA Book Festival, the LA Times hosted us under a big tent that held, I think, maybe 100, 200 people. But about 600-700 people showed up, and completely sold out of all the books and stuff. But what really blew me away was how much and then they prompted Disney and Hulu and Max to go ahead and stream it on their platforms, which really blew me away. And then I realized it was sort of like a growing realization how big Blood In Blood Out was, that there were shops in every city across the country selling merchandise, and that people were willing to pay me $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to sign their posters. To me, it's way out of my world. I stay home. I'm working on a trilogy, and I'm working on Blood In Blood Out 2, and I don't really concern myself with the commercial aspects of it. But it's out there, boy, big time, and it's and it continues to do. It continues to grind, and it continues to garner more and more accolades and awareness and customers and people and stuff, all over the country and stuff. So it's as big a shock to me as it was to anybody else, and it's still as pertinent as it is today.
Yeah, I feel like, Jimmy, it's actually become even like it's entered the discussions now more so. I continue to see this movie as I've kind of come into film and things like that. People continue to talk about this movie so much, and as I went back to watch it the other day, it was a film that it wasn't really I wasn't aware of when it came out. I was in in the early 90s. I'm a teenager at that point in time in Western Kentucky. And it wasn't a film that we were, that I was aware of until I became, until I got older. And then I sat down to rewatch it the other night. It was just completely blown away, by this film. And you see why everyone continues to talk about it, because the critiques in it are so relevant, not only, in the early 90s or in the 70s and 80s, but all the way up until today. So, I mean, you've got to feel amazing about that.
Yeah, no, we have I think Patiño could probably speak more to this issue than I can, but yeah, no, it was a perfect culmination of the perfect storm. With Taylor, the director, who had done La Bamba, and also he did La Bamba with Luis, and he had also done a documentary with Bukowski. So he knew poetry. He won awards for that documentary early in his career, and then he did La Bamba. Then he grew up with Chicanos in Santa Barbara. And he called me after the Luis Valdez. All of this is in the book, which is really amazing. Because I'm a book guy, and it came about with the photographer Rick Merton, and he said he showed us on his Instagram that he had 75,000 followers, and that he had been showing them photographs in the movie. And that to me was a revelation. I was like, 75, because I'm not much the technology other than the fact that I use this laptop to write on, but I was pretty shocked. I thought, well, 75,000 people, that's quite a lot, isn't it? He said, there's some sites that have 30 million followers at Blood In Blood Out. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And when I traveled to India and when I traveled to Guam and Hawaii and Japan, in every instance that I went to those countries, I was stopped by people on the street who were telling me in their own words, blood in, blood out, blood in, blood out. And even when I landed in Guam, and we spent a week in Guam, I went down at 4 o'clock in the morning to the ocean because they had such beautiful, beautiful water. And about 40 or 50 of the hotel workers gathered down below to greet me because they all were fans of Blood In, Blood Out. And it was pretty bizarre. And then when we went to the Polynesian Islands, we were given gifts made out of whalebone and stuff in honor of Blood In, Blood Out. And the story goes on and on. At a cab in Japan, I couldn't pay the cab driver because he told me, no, blood in, blood out, vatos locos. And I was like, okay. And in India, they had a celebration out of Bombay, in a little village there. They had a celebration for blood in, blood out, and they served pork chops and Jello with $20 bills at the bottom of the Jello. And I was like, anyway, this could go on. I mean, I've gotten invitations from everywhere, but I normally just turn everything down because I'm so busy. I'm trying to finish up a couple of projects, but it shocked even me to realize how popular that film was 30 years later, and how a lot of these marijuana growers were contacting me to pay me if they could use my face on their cigarettes, on their joints, And they wanted to create my character and La Onda was Gato, and they wanted to create Gato gear. Sign off on it, and I'm like, you can't make it. So it's good to see that Patiño is locked into the scholarship on it, because we really need to start delving into that and what it means for us as a culture and a people, and how to take from it something that we can actually use as a foundation that we can instill in a curriculum and stuff like that, and show why it lands so strongly in our hearts.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised how large it's gotten, how popular the cult following that it's developed. I see it on social media. I mean, there are, like you said, there's pages dedicated to it. People are repeating all the lines from the film, and putting it in context. I'm really curious how it's resonating with folks right now. For me, at about 16, 17 years old when the film came out, as a young Chicano kid, man, it was just, that's where I have to start, right? Is just to thank you for writing it. There weren't many depictions, particularly complex depictions, about Chicano men. And here you got these three characters who are really complex, right? Who are engaging with the realities of the barrio that's being depicted. I mean, again, this was just mind blowing for us as teens, to see that in a moment in the early 1990s, right? And I've had time to reflect on this now, but as a teenager, you're just going through it, but it was a moment of kind of really right wing shifts in the country, and that were very anti-black and anti-brown. The rise of mass incarceration that's depicted in the film, policing and the role policing was playing in terms of politicizing many of us with the way we were treated, the fascination with gangs and the usage of the drug war and gangs to kind of police and patrol and control folks. This gave us a critical kind of outlet to try to make sense, I think, of that moment in the early 1990s. So again, thanks for writing it, and I'm not surprised by the following.
You're welcome. I remember I had to ruminate, and I had to reflect on how valid was the need to write about my experience growing up as a kid on the streets and a Chicanito. How valid is that? And because I had written books of poetry and won all the awards you can win in this country in my poetry. 29 books later, in so many different languages and stuff like that. So primarily I was known as a poet. And but as I was leaving Los Angeles, I would fly back every other weekend, and the Los Angeles riots were occurring. And when I'd get on the plane and fly back over Los Angeles, I could see the fires below. I could see the buildings on fire and stuff like that. And I'd look down there, and I would see the rioting and stuff, And I was thinking that most of the news media were just grabbing glitchy clips for middle class America. just so they could be like, oh, crisis-oriented news bullshit, you know? But I was looking down, and I guess I thought to myself, this is where language takes a primary role in that through language, we can show why what's happening on the ground is happening. You know, why the fires and why the rioting and why the gangs and all of that stuff, because they serve a protective shield around these kids. Beyond that shield, it's just danger and menace, and the cops have killed so many without ever being accountable for the murders. So many untold murders of young Chicano kids that never even go investigated, you know? So something we had to write, so to speak, behind the scenes as to why that was happening. And that was the reason why I had to use Chicano language in the film. And it was so bizarre because when I used Chicano language, I didn't really understand whether the actors were going to be able to do it or not. But it was so pleasing that when I wrote it in Chicano language without trying to gringoize it, without trying to make it, you know, mainstream English in America, and I just kept to the solid vow that I would write it from my own Chicano heart. It was crazy how these actors gravitated to that and expressed it with passion in their acting, and how it merged into their blood and their consciousness as being a time and place for them to actually express who they were and who their families were and who their culture was. And they came out powerfully. And that's why today you have every rap group, you have every person doing t-shirts, you have all the movies, everyone's quoting from the film because it really did go back to the way we speak to each other and our humor. Our humor is not the humor of George Lopez or all these other sitcom stars, and it's not the humor that you see on Comedy Central and stuff. Our humor comes from those crazy little phrases that we make up that we completely culturally understand, that connects our reality to each other. And that's why all those phrases continue to live on in time. I want a little bit of chon chon, or the rabbits, we're like rabbits, go round and round, and how that's quoted on 1 million t-shirts in this country and sold every day, you know? Because those little epithets are symbolic, are metaphors that describe so much of who we are as a people. And interestingly enough, people outside of that experience, the Chicano, the Hispanic organizations, really didn't say much about it. It was interesting that upper middle class Hispanics were quiet because they were waiting for permission to like it. And the beauty of the Chicano on the street, the beauty of the blue collar worker, the beauty of the Chicano who grew up in East LA or any other barrio in America, in San Anto and Las Tripas and San Diego and everywhere else, the beauty of that is that they didn't wait to celebrate it. They celebrated it right then and there. They went out into the streets. They started wearing their emblems. They started speaking its language. They started repeating it to each other. It was like a Cinco de Mayo, but in a truly Chicano cultural kind of way that shows you the power of movies. You know, it's really weird. It's crazy. It was, and then, you know, once I got there, once I did it, and I wrote it, and I worked with the actors, and I went to San Quentin, and the director said, you got to come with us. So I went there, and I quit filming. When halfway through the film, I walked away from it. I couldn't deal with the prison thing again and all that stuff. But I eventually came back and finished it up. But right after that movie, lots of agencies called me up and said, we want to rep you as a literary. We want to rep you as an agent. We've got 3 movies we want you to try out for, blah, 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 blah. And I just said, no, I got to go back and write poetry. And everybody was mystified by that. Everybody was like, wow, how can this be? Where this guy just came here, wrote this, and went back to write poetry. But that was what I did. And there's been more than one investigative reporter from the LA Times and the New York Times who have been sent out to research what happened in LA that made me leave. And after 2 or 3 years of investigating, literally I sat with the reporter, the journalist, face to face across the table, And the journalist more than once has told me, why did you leave? And I said, because I wanted to come back home and write poetry, but they couldn't believe that it was because of that. They had to believe that there was some scandal behind it, right? And I said, no, it was just I wanted to go. And they said, well, we interviewed agents, we interviewed directors, we interviewed producers, we interviewed all the friends, all the women that you knew. And every single one of them said, no, the dude just left because he wanted to. So it was interesting that I did that because it surprised even me, given that what they were putting on the table for me, a house in Malibu, a new acting career. They offered everything you could offer, but it just goes to show you the power of the word. Poetry. I came back to write poetry and hung out with a familia. Yeah.
Jimmy, I'm wondering, so much of what you wrote revolves around family. I mean, that's the biggest aspect, between our three leads in this film. I kept thinking about it, Dolores and the role of women in the family, the idea of the neighborhood as this extended family unit. Then, of course, the prison scenes themselves where, Miklo is trying to find his own family there as well. I'm kind of wondering if we can kind of talk a little bit about, how you were conceptualizing family as you were kind of bringing that to the page and trying to explain to the viewer what this meant for these young men, in the 70s and 80s as they're kind of growing into their own adulthood.
Well, I'm an orphan, right? I don't have parents, right? So I've had to come up with a different way of having a mother, because when you don't have a mother, it's the most fundamental trauma that you can never shake off. It appears in so many ways, and your addiction and your alcoholism and your violence and your inability to be a father and your inability to be sensitive, your inability to be affectionate. It goes on and on and on and on and on. But the one thing that you really can't argue against is that we're born in diapers and we die in diapers, I mean, you get to be an old guy and you're toddling around in diapers. It's so funny. But the person that's there in the beginning is a caretaker for you, your mother, and the person is there. And yet, interestingly enough, though, in prison, some of the guys, since I didn't have a mother, I was very, very partial. I adopted a lot of mothers to the literature. So I started reading all the Russian novelists and Chekhov's short stories and Turgenev's hunting stories. And then I began to write using the persona of the person who had a mother in my imagination. It brought out a lot of the grief and it brought out a lot of the joy of having a mother. So I adopted a lot of people in literature as my mothers. And that seemed to work for me. And then poetry, of course, became my mother. Whatever attributes you give to a mother in real life, poetry took on those attributes in literature for me. I began to write poetry, and it gave me affection, it gave me love, it gave me hope, it gave me dreams, it gave me all these beautiful things that mothers give you, and more. So poetry, to me, it had a feminine aspect at its very center. And everything you can say about a mother, you can say about poetry when you're composing or writing it, It's such an extraordinary metaphysical reality that Borges probably said it best, I mean, Borges, he kept grappling with that idea that literature was the most feminine manifestation, that kept us human, that kept us alive, that kept us getting out of bed, that kept us, we could yearning, for mother's affection and stuff like that. It's a beautiful thing that he was able to say, and the way he spoke and wrote, how using literature was a great, great, great primordial mother, that you could take your filth to and take your truth to and take your fragility to. It's a beautiful thing. And with Chicano people, I used to be in the visiting room, and this is so long ago that I've almost forgotten about it because I've gone through a lot of transitional changes in character and sensibility. I mean, I've gone through a lot of different me's, new me's, old me's, and I've sloughed off and shaken off a lot of who I used to be. So it's hard to go back 50 years and see that person that I was. One of the things that was interesting to me was there were guys that we used in Chicano culture, and Patiño can speak to this better than I can. But when we get into a conflict with each other, we immediately insult each other's mothers, And there's a lot of Chicano guys that were so traumatized, became so dysfunctional, they couldn't operate in society. So you have grown kids living with mothers, 38, 48, 58, and they're still living with their moms. You have this crazy, crazy connection that we hate them, and then we adore them, you know? La Virgen de Guadalupe, every single back that you look at in prison has one, you know? And yet one of the phrases we use is chinga tu madre, you know, go after your mother, and it goes on and on and on and on. But you dare disrespect somebody's mother, and they'll try to fight you to the death. So it's a really cruel disassociation and association where you love your mother and you hate her. You expect her to do everything for you, and you hate her because it keeps you from doing what you had to do as a man. So it's really interesting that we're so tied to our mothers in so many ways. Maybe Patiño can talk to that. I'm sure he can.
No, I think, yeah, I mean, that's great. I think the theme of familia and community, of course, is central to the narrative. Yeah, I mean, one way I see the film is kind of reinfusing a new generation with kind of Chicano movement values and notions that see the barrio and the family as the site of kind of radical cultural affirmation, and I mean really the site in which to create resistance to kind of the colonial hegemony, right? The colonial power structure. And so yeah, it's interesting thinking about the role of the family and gender roles. I think for maybe not for the first time, but I really kind of pieced it together that Dolores, you know, was such a central figure, a grounding figure in the film, the matriarch of the family, right? And this is while Lupe, Miklo's mother, is not the best mother, right? And so you have this kind of dichotomy: the good woman and the not so good woman that kind of shows up. That's been talked about in Chicano studies and Chicano feminist critiques, especially of family. But I remember the scene where Dolores is like telling Paco that Miklo's going to stay in your room, and you know, Macho Paco tries to, you know, no, I'm not sharing my room, you know, with anybody but a woman, right? And Dolores like checks him, right? She puts him in just my house, and you do, and so that strength from a woman in the film, I think, was really important, and creating some complexity amongst women characters. I also walked away with, I mean, the idea of creating familia, and maybe this comes from some of your experiences you had, Jimmy, in terms of you had to create familia, like the nuclear family wasn't there, so you have to create familia. So the gangs get complicated in terms of not just being criminal organizations, they're families, right? They're families to cope with the context, with the things that, you know, working class folks are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And really, what ends up being depicted that's really important is a complex Chicano masculinity. You know, Paco and especially Cruz cry several times in the film, right? And so reflecting on that, like, you know, the stereotype of Mexicanos, Mexican men, are that, you know, you're very stoic and macho and bold and whatnot. In fact, I think that's a key way that we're racialized, right? It's an idea that I share with my students in terms. Students tend to say, "Oh yeah, of course Mexican men are macho. Of course they're patriarchal. Of course they're sexist and whatnot. And of course we got our problems, right? And we have to like confront those." And this film though shows a complexity where Chicano men can be vulnerable. They can be emotional. They can cry, especially Cruz. I think the character of Cruz. So I wondered if you had that in mind, thinking about the kind of mainstream stereotypes of Mexican men and Mexican people generally, Mexican women too, and if this was, you know, how you wrote in relationship to showing some alternatives or complexities.
Sure, it's you're absolutely right on all those points, Patiño. Patiño, brother, I'm sorry. Lupe's indulgence, and it shows you the gran puta Cortez's Malinche, the lady who takes the easy way out, hits the town all made up, and we have those stereotypes. Es pura puta esta mujer, Then you have the other woman, Dolores, who's sacrificing. You can tell she's sacrificed her life for her family, And it's interesting because you have indulgence and sacrifice, and one of them has a sort of nobility about her. Dolores, the other one, just has luscious extravagance, sensuality and sexual, attraction and stuff like that. We have both of those. The interesting thing is that when Little Juanito got the needle, it shows you what we're all really quiet about as Chicano men, or as women también. We don't speak much about it. We don't speak much about the sacrifices of young kids who die early. We sort of keep them in our heart. We don't say anything about it. It's almost like sacred ground. You don't talk about your little brother, who died 16 years old in a gunfight. And they're all trying to be accepted. They're all in that horrible, horrible mix of trying to appeal to the world their importance, trying to prove themselves to the world, even though they've been emasculated by society, white society. And a lot of them, like when Paco sees Jesse again, you notice that he doesn't go out of his way to be really expressive about his grief. He just looks at him and bans him. And we're so good at that as a culture. We're so good at censoring people that you're not allowed here anymore. We're so good at judging people because colonialism was so heavy on us as judgments. It judged us that we were not good enough. You can come in, but you can't come in. You don't speak English, you speak Spanish, we'll take the English speaker one. It was a constant struggle to be approved and to sustain our agony in silence. No, you're not supposed to talk. You're not supposed to, because it'll upset everybody. If you start talking about your feelings, you get 2 minuses on your masculinity. You're not a man. And that whole idea of not being a man equals to how much you're willing to sacrifice yourself for your friends. If you sacrifice yourself for your friends a lot, then you're hoisted up as a leader. That you're not afraid of death, and that cuts against the grain of our own successes in life, of our own achievements in life. I mean, that's why leaving the barrio, you become a betrayer, you become a disruptor, you deceive people. When you leave the barrio, estás vendido, you're sold out, only because you're becoming successful. And it's like, why does it have to be that way? Why do we have to stay in the barrio and be like everybody else? And it's because we're so terrified of being alone. We're so terrified of being abandoned. We need each other around us, And we grow up telling our stories to each other. We grow up relying on each other. We grow on being able to predict each other's actions. And when that's gone, we get scared and we start acting scared. And then we have to prove to everybody else that we're not scared. So we do something stupid, like we take too many drugs and we OD, But the whole idea that Juanito took that needle because he was trying to follow his older primos and stuff like that, it goes right back to the Pintos coming out of prison and all the youngsters trying to mimic them. I'm going to go ahead and wear these codclothes and wear a white Peter t-shirt, and the older guys telling us, "Mira, I'm going to give you this cuete, and you better, if anybody over there comes over here, you got to shoot him," And it's like, okay, I'll win approval. This guy's going to, he's going to set me up, And that's what Juanito was trying to do. He was just trying to be like them, and he ended up killing himself. And then the mother's like Dolores. She loves Ben. She loves Banna. She loves those kids. But the one thing she does not go for is sacrificing the young ones to that lifestyle. You can live that lifestyle if you want, Cabron, but you're not going to take this little vato with you. And so she always has little Juanito next to her, and so does the father. And the one time that he's with Jesse, he dies. And you see the terrible grief that hits that family, because in some beautiful, amazing kind of way, they're all really tied into each other. They're connected, deeply connected to each other. And when something happens, it happens to all of them. And you say you saw Crucito's grief, you know, it was like, wow. And the same thing with Miklo, you know, constant outsiders trying to win our affection by doing daredevil things. Like as kids, I'm going to run in front of this car, watch it, but it's going to get really, really close. And you tell the guy, no, it's got to be closer. You know, if you're a real man and you want to be like us, it's got to be closer. And the guy waits till it's really close and goes across, and the car hits him, and he's in the hospital. And somehow we consider that a badge of courage. When we go visit the kid in the hospital, he's in a coma, and we're like, no, the vato was straight up. He was buena gente, you know. And that comes from that colonial thing that any kind of self-importance, you have to sacrifice yourself in some way. And it's got to flip. We got to flip that coin, you know. It's got to be different, you know. And so the screenplay that I'm writing now, Blood and Blood Out 2, it deals with the kids. The kids of La Onda. And what I wanted to do is show how the kids have not only been influenced and affected by their parents, but also how each individually changed by it in a beautiful way, you know. They're going to come up strong. They're going to come up really, really knowledgeable. They're going to come up culturally insightful and stuff like that. So that's interesting, you know. That's kind of the characters that I wrote about were the characters that I knew in my life. I knew young Chicano kids that wanted to prove themselves so bad they shot themselves in the head, you know, because they wanted to prove that they were men. And I'll show you how much que yo no soy un cobarde, that I'm not a coward, I'll show you. And they flicked the revolver shot and it blew their head off, you know. And you know, we walked away from that kind of an incident empty-hearted, feeling that why did he have to prove himself, you know? Because we loved him anyway. But none of us said that. So none of us said there was nothing around him in our environment to show that we loved him. You know, and people, when they love each other, they usually love each other in an environment that shows that reflects that love. And in Lupa's kitchen, that love was reflected big time. And what's her name? And the other lady, the actress, she had no, she went out to a really good time. But yeah, no, it does have all those really, those real pivotal characters that are in our culture. And again, I think people love it because of that. But most importantly, I think the kids like that were your age really loved it because it really spoke to your own experience. It affirmed who you were in a way that wasn't belittling. That was almost a celebration of who you were. Yeah, that's me, man. That's me. Mm-hmm. And it was cool that nobody was criticizing it. And that's what the film had. It didn't have any criticism of us. It was truly just a celebration of who we were.
Jimmy, I'm kind of wondering, and actually Jimmy Patiño as well, because Jimmy, I also read your book in the last 3 days before. Got it over here somewhere on my desk as we were prepping up for this. And I was interested actually in the myriad of relationships between Chicanos and the police. Jimmy Patiño, you write about this, about the deportation and things like that. And we see this in the film too, right? There's all of this different stuff between, say, this antagonistic relationship when they pull the guys over. You know, Paco eventually joins the police. Is it an antagonistic relationship between, say, white police officers in LA at this point in time in the 70s and 80s? Does that change over time? How does that relationship does that relationship ever evolve at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And the time period of the film from the early 70s to the early 80s, which is somewhat coincidental, that's kind of the time period of the book where I look at the Chicano movement and trying to address kind of immigrant rights issues, which get sparked by different examples of brutality, right? From local police to vigilantes to the Border Patrol. And I think, I think initially, I think Montana says, white's the system, right? And so, Chicano movement activists I interviewed talk about, their barrios were all Mexican people, except for people in powerful positions, principals, elected officials, and the police. And the police were a pretty constant presence in their lives, a negative presence in terms of policing literally where they could go, where they couldn't go. And then sometimes, that led to certain forms of violence and repression. And what's interesting about that time period too is because some of the successes of the civil rights movement, you do get to see more brown cops, more black and brown folks in positions of power. So it becomes a little more complex, I think, during this time period as kind of a concession to the civil rights movement to hire more officers of color. But in many cases, they do the same thing. It's just in brown face now that they're still repressing the people. So Paco's character is really interesting to think about. Early on, the cops are the enemy and the bad guys and whatnot. Just rewatching it, I noticed how Mano, Paco's stepfather, wants him, before all the incidents kind of lead for him to be a cop, when he's still a cholo, when he's still like a vato loco. Mano wants him to go to the military. Mano wants him to go to the Marines. And the politics of vatos locos is like, we reject all of that. I don't want to be a jarhead like you. F the police, in other words. But then he gets incorporated. So this kind of getting incorporated into becoming a police officer, which gets really complex, I think, to think about. I think Paco thinks he's helping the people in some ways by addressing kind of the drug issues that are killing young people in the community, but still, engages in, and he's a cop, right? And Cruz and Chewy and other characters remind him, especially when he shoots Nicola's leg off, right? There's this critique of the police that maintains itself. You kill your own people, right? Did you say hey Holmes to Miklo before you shot him, right? And so I really liked how, one, that politics is very clear, that there's a Chicano politics very critical of policing as a form of repression and racism and all of that, and how it gets complicated through Paco's character. I'm sure Jimmy could share more on that.
No, I'm listening. It's good stuff. Patiño, good stuff you're saying. One of the things that I wanted to illustrate in the movie was, we can deal with cops all day long because it's like, if the cops come out to a call somewhere in the barrio, they'll come out aggressive. They'll come out with a hostile character, and they'll tell you, you sit over there and you sit over there. And I'll get to you when I'm ready. Right now, I want you to answer these questions. In almost every single case, if they come out to a barrio, that's how they're going to act. If you change environments to a nice upper class neighborhood where most of the people are making 150 to 200,000, and the cops arrive because of a complaint, because maybe some Chicano was walking down the street, and if that Chicano, somebody called a report to say, oh, you know what, he was looking in my windows, because all these white neighbors freak out because they don't know, they're still really, really afraid of crossing that bridge to get to know who we are. Because this kid is walking down the street, he's got his all braided Chicano hair, and, you kind of got the baggy, saggy bags and all that. And these two little white girls pick up the phone. Hey, there's somebody here looking at us, And the cops follow that kid home, and it happens to be a really nice home. every single time the cops will have permission to come in, and they'll be really nice, and they'll explain to you, we got a call, it's nothing serious, don't worry, it's okay. We just got a call, you seem to have a nice life here. And it's really strange how environments and neighborhoods that have, like a bunch of trees and parks around and stuff, how they've been taught in the academy that they could get in trouble if they disrespect these upper rich kids. And in the barrio, almost every single time they come with a distinct attitude of defiance toward us, that we've already done something wrong just by being born, that we don't deserve the justice that they give the kids up on the hill. And that all has to do with power. So when Montana takes his power in prison, and his power is very real, because it's the first time that a lot of those Chicano kids go into prison. It's no longer the cops and them playing games and stuff or whatever. Now it's like, who gets the real power to run this place? Because it's not got to do with the cops. They got nothing to do with it. It's about power and who's going to punk who out, and who's going to make the money in this place. And Montana has this great political sense about that. Then Paco, on the other hand, joins what we mostly would observe as the enemy camp. He joins the enemy camp, and he's trying to work on our behalf. You see it in the movie that he's not against us. He's not trying to come down hard on us like that. But he did shoot his cousin. He did get him, he got him, and he goes into the movie explaining why he did that, because he has so much guilt that he did it. He's like, dude, I couldn't just let you go. I shot your leg, and there's a sort of like Miklo understands that there's a little honor between these two Bato locals, that he had to do what he had to do and Miklo had to do what he had to do, right? And it's interesting because where do you find common ground as they get older and Paco becomes a detective and Miklo becomes a shot caller in prison? All of a sudden, you realize that they're both on the opposite side of the fence, but they both have power. They've yielded to their fates and they're wielding power now. And not either one of them are using it against each other to detract from each other. They just come to it with respect, which is kind of a cool thing to do, to respect each other because they come from the same place. And I've encountered that in my own life with policemen that are Chicanos. And I come up with a really bad attitude, when I'm like, pinche, vato jodido. And I come up like that, and then all of a sudden, the guy's giving me a ticket, and I start asking him, hey, well, where are you from? Well, what's it like to be a Chicano cop? And before I know it, we're talking like we're both friends. And this actually happened to me. I was like, man, and he says, and I said, look, I live around, I got stopped one day because I dropped my kid off for a baseball game. And the guy was behind me talking to two ladies. And I waited and waited. He wouldn't move until I finally just honked the horn and went like that to the guy. When are you going to do it? So he moved up. Then I took off from the baseball field, and then he turned on his lights 5 minutes later behind me. And I was in my pajamas because my son just got me out of bed. So I didn't have a license. I didn't have insurance. I didn't have my seatbelt. I didn't have anything. And the author comes up to me, but as he's filling out the tickets, he has a Chicano flag on his lapel. For the field workers in Milano. And that really interested me because on this side was an American flag. And I asked him, I said, what's that? And he came straight out and told me, he said, that's because I'm a proud Chicano. And I was like, whoa, dude. And then he said to me, and by the way, he said, that was my wife and daughter. And all of a sudden that came into like respect for the familia. And so I immediately apologized for telling him to move. Because it was like a violation of familia, And then when I apologized to him, he seemed to notice who I was, but didn't know who I was. But he said, you look very familiar. Have I arrested you before? And I said, no, you never arrested me. And it's funny because later on he realized that his daughter in high school had my books on her dresser, and one of the books had my photograph on it. And so he saw me, right? But interestingly enough, I lived around the corner, so I told the guy, and this is crazy, because one of the reasons I went to prison was because I shot a DEA agent, right? We had a gun battle, right? And so I was really like off limits with these guys, right? And but I said to him, well, follow me around the corner, and I'll because he said, I'm not going to write you up, which was very cool. And that's what we need to do more of, right? That's what we need to make use of that, of who we are with each other and break through those uniforms, you know? So he followed me, and the only thing I could think about was I got to get back to my house before him so I can clean the coke and the marijuana off the table, you know? Because if the vato walks in and finds all this fucking coke and he finds all this weed, what the fuck, right? So I had to like get there first, but not make him think I was trying to lose him, right? So like I was like, every time he turned a corner, I would turn a corner. And so when I got to my house, I ran in as fast as I could and scooped everything off the table, right? And then I went out and said, hey, man, welcome to my house. You know? But it wasn't like a nice white person's house. It was the Chicano's house, right? So he walks in, and then the first thing I tell him is there any way you could take your gun off and put it on the mantle because it makes you nervous, bro? So those are all things in the Chicano character. Like most white people wouldn't mind a cop having a gun in their house. But to me, it was a threat. I was like, could you put the gun away, you know? And then most, I mean, there's a lot of different symbolic things that pertain to our culture that are different than other cultures. And that is, one of the big taboos that we have is never invite a cop to your house, you know? But I wanted to, because I wanted to, and interestingly enough, after speaking with him, just like in Blood In, Blood Out, and the way that I treated the character of Paco, I let the audience get to know Paco as a detective. And so we didn't hate him. Interestingly enough, we didn't walk away from the movie hating Paco. We walked away from the movie understanding that vato, you know, and that's what I wanted to do, right? And a lot of Chicano cops, after that movie came out, told me, is I was able to go around and speak to police fraternities and stuff like that. They thanked me for portraying Chicano cops in that way, not as animals or beasts or monsters, but really trying to make a difference, you know? Even though there are some Chicano cops that go out of the way to really beat on us, there are still that group that really want to help us. And I was appealing to them in Blood In, Blood Out. And it was cool because nobody condemned Nico. We all understood he was just trying to be accepted. From the very first time he broke Spider's windshield, I'll do this for you if you accept me. Through la onda, you know? And with Paco too, the same thing. None of us hated Paco. And we all understood why he shot him. And it's one of those corazon moves, you know? He has a lot of corazon, and he had to do this, you know? It was one of those things. And that's really what makes the movie, I think, profoundly successful for Chicano people, is because it had corazon. Interestingly enough, how to interpret that word, I don't know. But it had a lot of cora. And the actors expressed that cora because they grew up with it. And that's what Lupe had too. Lupe had so much cora when she tried to protect her family against all these gangs and drugs. The thing that you notice more about her is her corazon, their heart, sitting there sewing their clothes and cooking for them, you know. Takes a lot of corazon to do that.
Now, Jimmy, I think the thing that I love so much about the film towards the end is that you're not judging any of these three guys. The film doesn't render judgment onto these men. You're watching them and understanding the decisions they make, all looking for their family, all looking to find who they are. Miklo as well, you know, Cruz, right? His decisions and how he comes apart, and the end there between Paco and Cruz, where they're, you know, where Paco's really kind of coming to understand all is there in front of that mural, which is just gorgeous. Like, I think that's the beautiful thing about this film, is that it's the humanity of the three characters, of the three leads here. It's, you know, you're rooting for the three of them as humans to find their way.
Yeah, I think Patiño can speak to this issue, but society has more than enough judgment on us, and we're like yeti when it comes to them criticizing us. But we're like we give a shit, you know, like we care, right? And one of the things that Vato Locos won't do amongst themselves, they won't criticize each other, but they will do cabula. That's like playing back and forth, you know, like, no hombre, tu realidad es como like your car is like an old boat that won't float in a puddle of pee, you know. That's not criticism. That's like cabula, charla, you know. And so judgments come from outside of our culture, outside of our communities, because there's every single little brown kid that's born is immediately subject to judgment by the color of his skin, you know? And every kid grows up with that guilt. Every kid grows up with that shame. And how do you deal with that shame? And how do you deal with that guilt? Those are the questions I think of blood in, blood out answers. is if you're born into that colonial disaster, how do you deal with that colonialism inbred in your cellular system? How do you deal with that shame? How do you deal with the guilt? And most of us have one answer, and that's hurt. We hurt, and we hurt ourselves, and we keep hurting ourselves. We do it with drugs, we do it with broken families, we do it with prison. It's just constantly hurting ourselves because way back in our psyche, we've been judged, you know, by a society that never even let us speak a word back, you know? And a lot of us, that's why I say all these guys that go to prison, these women, honest to God, before they become stone cold gangsters, they're really, really vulnerable, fragile, and sensitive. They really are, you know, and all they did was react to the pain, and they didn't know where the pain was coming from, but they felt the pain of an exile. They felt the pain of an unforgiving, of a person who's never been forgiven. They felt the pain of somebody who went to confession and never was atoned for his sins because he was too evil, too brown, spoke calor, because he was not like the white people, you know? And the thing is that when we in my case at least, my reaction to that denial of my humanity was to say, fuck you. And so I was immediately categorized as a troublemaker. Because I said, when the teacher said, you people are lazy, you steal and stuff, I was only like 10 years old when I stood up and said, no. My grandpa was not lazy. You're the one that's a liar. And they said, oh, we're going to throw you out of school. Boom, I was a dropout. I never went back to school. Because I said, no, you're a liar. My grandpa wasn't lazy. And as soon as some kid grows up and does that, then they're going to fight the unending battle, you know? And that's really what Blood in, Blood Out was. But how do you retain culture and survive? Oh, how do you retain it? How do you let it grow on you and be successful in the world? Because almost every single Chicano, and I think Patiño can really, really stress on elaborate on this, that the more higher you go into society, the more you have to ask yourself, how much am I willing to compromise my culture, you know, and be like them? And the more you say when you're not willing to compromise, the more you become an outsider. And that's a very uncomfortable state of being when you go to work and feel like you go to faculty meetings and everybody's white. And every time you say an opinion, it comes from a Chicano sort of background. People look at you like, "Why can't you get it together and be one of us or whatever? Why do you always got to come in here talking about your culture, you know?" Well, you know what? Because there was a genocide that took place for 200 years, you know, and you hurt a lot of people. You lynched us, you pillaged, you raped, you murdered, you burned, you took our land. That's why I'm sitting here telling you a different opinion, because I've experienced it. And all of this has gone into my studies and why I got my degree and why I teach, you know, because there's so much to learn. And all of you around this table are telling me, ignore it. And
both of those themes. I mean, the theme of like the tensions kind of coming from outside of the relationships between the three brothers, right? And of course, the tensions of kind of distancing oneself from the barrio or the culture or whatnot are it's really cool to hear you elaborate on those. I think that final scene where Cruz is kind of saying the speech is really clarifying for me, really conveys this and kind of wraps up the film really well when he says, it's, you know, we're all from Islos, right? And we're all trying to survive in a fucking war zone is the way he puts it. And so whether you became a cop or whether you became the head of La Onda or whether you became an artist, you're still grappling with that same, the real desmadre is the colonial context that creates East Los as a war zone. And so the film never resolves, the cops are good, we'll embrace them. Never says that. And it never fully embraces La Onda either as a way. But they're both responses of survival, of attempting to create family, carnalismo, brotherhood, in some way. And so that scene is always very important to me in the way it kind of doesn't point at each other, but points towards the kind of structural circumstances that the hood or the barrio is in, right? And so I think that ties to, that's a Chicano movement kind of politics that sees the barrio as valuable in terms of resisting, creating a culture of resistance, a culture of survival, in a context in which it's simultaneously dangerous because of outside forces of colonialism, discrimination, class exploitation, so on and so forth. So it's cool to hear Jimmy unpack that a bit. And I did notice this round in watching the film, what you just described, Jimmy, in terms of how uncomfortable one becomes when they leave the community or begin to become successful. So of course, Baco, it's obvious becoming a cop, how far away from the community that makes them, and all the the disorientation and tensions that brings up in him and his family and his people, right? I noticed it more closely with Cruz this time, though, too. As he becomes a successful artist, there's this depiction of kind of the way he is successful is because white people are kind of seeing beauty, or in a really commodified way, right? It's a really problematic way that white people are kind of fetishizing barrio experiences, Chicano culture, and Cruz is uncomfortable with it, which is, I think, the scene. I have the extended cut where the scene is there where Cruz comes back high. He goes out with his homies, he gets high, and comes back and makes a fool of himself. But I think that could be reflecting, like, I'm uncomfortable with this situation with these white people, but I'm sure I need the money. I need to make a living. But Cruz throughout the film, expresses this dismay. Like, I don't want to just decorate rich people's living room, I think he says at one point, right? And so I think Jimmy's right. That it speaks to, when one becomes successful coming from these working class Latino neighborhoods. I think Cornel West said it before. For Black and Brown folks, your success marginalizes you from your own community, and so then you got to try to balance that. And we see Cruz and Paco in many ways kind of struggle with that. So that's an interesting insight for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting that as you were saying, it's interesting that Cruzito, through his art, is partially accepted by the white world. Mm-hmm. But and it helps Cruzito. He makes money. They got money. And he needs money, right? And he gets high. He's not like one of these guys who go to the art gallery and sells paintings and he decides to go home and go to sleep. No, you sell some painting, you go out and you get fucking high because you don't know when you're going to sell another painting. So you might as well enjoy it today. All this stuff, but let's go ahead and put our money into stocks and bonds. Chadle, we're probably never going to have this money again, so let's party down. That's what, let's enjoy it. Let's try to be like rich for one night. So he goes out and gets high. Oh, that day I sold some paint. And that's a celebration of an achievement that may not be permanent, but you know what? It's what the little tiny get high nights create culture, But the interesting thing about all of that is that when Cruzito sells a painting, mainstream society forgives him for being Chicano. It forgives him for getting high. It forgets him. Like that lady who ran the art gallery, she was like, I forgive you. But it's a condescending forgiveness. It's like, we understand that you're inferior. You can't handle success. At the end of the movie, when the three vatos get together and they're on the LA channel and they're slap boxing and playing, That's the kind of forgiveness that they all survived this experience, and at the end of it, the love got stronger. So that's like a forgiveness from Chicanismo, from Patos Locos to each other, as opposed to the forgiveness that we receive from mainstream society when we contribute something to it. It's like, no, there's never going to be total acceptance, but there's going to be like, it's just like the Indians, like all these Indians that I know here. They'll work on a piece of sculpture, and while they're working on it, if you visit them, they talk all this trash, right? But the second they go to this white guy who's going to buy it, they become meek little Fort Indians, They're like, go like this with their sculpture. And we used to make fun of them so much. Like, dude, you were kissing his ass, man, with every little sculpture like a little Fort Indian. It was like, no, I wasn't. I'm a warrior. I said, you ain't a warrior. You were kissing his ass, dude. And he's like, you better not say it. So we fight among ourselves, but we'll go out of our way to demean ourselves to sell peace so that we can look like men in our wives' eyes, Which is like up in Utah, down southern Utah. I went up there with a group of a diverse group. I had a famous actress. I had an 80-year-old white guy who was an amazing man who had sold everything he owned in Phoenix and decided to become a poet. Herbert Lowry, I call him a saint. He was a saint. And then I had Andrea, who was a multimillionaire. And then I had Jason, who was a gangbanger. And then I had Marlon, who was a Santa Ana Pueblo guy, just came out of prison, badass dude. We all went up there, and meth was so prevalent in that community that we couldn't even talk to the people in the auditorium because everybody was freaking zombied out of meth. I mean, it was horrifying. That to me, I don't know this thing about recreational drugs. That doesn't apply to marginal cultures. We don't do drugs to be recreational, although we may, if we become white collar attorney generals and we go out with whatever. They depict that bullshit, that myth on TV a lot. Mostly people of color do drugs because we have to deal with enduring the separation of our hearts from our lives. There's so much separation from our hearts and our lives. Through all our lives, we keep on trying to put them together. I mean, can we be passionate about what we're doing, but not always be constantly vigil about where we come from and conscious of the differences that we are constantly. So when you do drugs, and no matter how successful you are, you're doing it to deal with the dichotomy between heart and action. That split that occurs when you're a person of color and you make it. There's always that. And once you cross the Rubicon, as they say, once you cross that and become totally them, I don't even know how to understand that disassociation. Psychiatrists haven't even been able to deal with that. How do you deal with the man who completely sloughs off his birthright? I mean, like Rodriguez, when he first came out with those books that he has, saying give up tacos and have McDonald's burgers or whatever, Richard Rodriguez and the Chicano community attacked him, for disrespecting his parents and saying don't ever speak Spanish and this and that, So the whole question of blood in, blood out was really uncompromising. It was that amazing gray area where it's neither black nor brown or black nor white. We exist in this limbo. Because they haven't even dealt with us since the Hidalgo. We're still owed all this land that they took from us. And we're still angry about them raping our grandmothers. And we're still angry about all this stuff. And it's almost like we don't even matter. That's what bothers us most, is that we don't matter. So when we take things serious by not sharing who we are with the outer culture, it's because of the betrayals of the past. So there's not a whole lot of people I know that are Chicano that are willing to sit down and share with you their innermost feelings. They've been taught that to do that exposes yourself in a dangerous way. And I think that's what Blood in, Blood Out really was about. It was about those little small moments in the film when these guys stepped across the Rubicon and shared who they were with the enemy. This is me, you know? And in some really amazing kind of way, we understood it the most part. Even though intellectually, if you were looking at the film, intellectually, there wasn't anything in it, and you really could pinpoint that was being radicalized. But emotionally, we understood what the character was doing. And that was cool, because when we walked out of the film, one of the reasons it became so successful was that we felt fulfilled. And that's crazy, isn't it? And we felt fulfilled when we walked out of the film, fulfilled enough to start to create a renaissance around it. That's crazy.
Jimmy, it's been 3 decades since this film came out. You've done multiple podcasts. I listened to a whole bunch of them before this one. Do you ever get tired of talking about this movie?
Yeah, I almost never talk about it. I only talked about it recently because I don't know, because people, I don't know. But I never talk about it, and I don't like podcasts. I don't like to go on and interview, and I really don't. I just like, probably what you've seen with a lot of things that have to do with writing and poetry and stuff like that, you know. But I do like poetry, and I do like writing, and nothing is or isn't, either or nor. You know what? We don't have enough people to speak for us. We don't have enough leaders to show us the way. We don't have enough mentors to open up, to show us how to open our hearts up. And that's why what Patiño is doing scholastically as a professor, that's one way of opening up a new world to us through education and through understanding the narrative in a different way. You know, but we don't have enough of any of the above. We don't have enough mentors. We don't have enough leaders. So I have to go out there, and I'm the worst person you could ever interview. I'm the worst because I hate all you people. You know, except for my people, I don't, but I hate everybody else, right? So it's kind of tough for me to be interviewed without being cynical or pessimistic, but still, you know, I have to do it sometimes just to tell people out there how much I love my people. With all our flaws and our wrongs and our faults and flaws and everything, I love us. And I grieve at our rage. I grieve at the men walking around with so much rage right now, man. You wouldn't believe how many Chicano men I know have so much rage in their bodies. And man, they're just, wow, I'm just like, and they live with that all the way through to the cemetery. I've never seen so much rage that we carry in ourselves for historical guilt, I guess, for not being enough men, for not being enough of what our family wanted, for not, like that cop told me when he went to my house. He said, my daughter begrudges me because I'm not an intellectual or a writer like you. I'm just a cop. And her friends are ashamed of me. You know, and it's like there's so much guilt and anger that we carry in our bodies that we don't have this. We need a lot more psychiatrists specifically for us, because we're in the Southwest. We outnumber everyone, and yet we have the least of resources to help us heal. That's just not right. You can get all the writers you want as long as they're east of the Mississippi River. It has nothing to do with us. All the money that New York generates for prison reform, very, very little of it comes west of the Mississippi. All the cultural studies they do, all east of the Mississippi. I could go on and on and on. Out here in the West, it's like from California to the Mississippi, man. You know, it's like you have writers in Albuquerque still writing about the Hudson when the Rio Grande is only 100 feet away. You know, that just goes to show you, you know, that, you know, like Rudy Anay's Bless Me Ultimo was a really amazing, magical masterpiece because it spoke about the Llano, the high prairie here, you know. And it's beautiful when you do that. Writers, when they write about their own culture and their own environment, are great writers because it takes so much craft and so much genius in the form of confidence to sit down and write in your own voice about your own place. That to me is amazing. That we don't use the critique that they use on the East Coast, called the colonial critique, I call it. That we don't use that colonial critique, that we use our own cultural critique here. That's what I want. Like right now, if I were to pick up the phone right now and call up a Chicano writer and say, hey, I love your first book, but I couldn't stand your second book. That person would hate me for the rest of my life because we've never been taught to accept criticism in a healthy way. We've never been taught that the beautiful thing of sitting down and talking about a book without personalizing the criticism. We've never been taught that. Like if Patiño told me in this thing, I can't stand those 3 other books you wrote, they were shit. I'd be like, well, fuck you too, That's I don't want to do that. I want to be able to talk about it in a really intellectual way, the way Borges talked about literature, to find out what the insights were that Patiño found, like, correct those insights and improve. But when you try to tell somebody something about how to improve something, they take it as a personal cut. And you know what? Get out of my face, dude. And that is a colonial thing that we inherited. It was a way of damaging us, and a way of keeping us from bonding with each other. Is that when I criticize you, that means that you are inferior and deplorable. We don't criticize to help you improve something. We criticize to show you how inferior you are. And you know what? That's all colonial stuff there. So Blood In, Blood Out didn't do that. Blood In, Blood Out said, you know what, dude? We got our faults. You know what? Pero que hombre, ándale, vámonos. It's like we just threw it like salt over the shoulder and said, let's get in the car and ride, baby. That's our response to it, I'm wondering myself why Patiño never invited me to his university to give a talk.
I'm guessing that's going to happen. Jimmy, why didn't you invite him to Minnesota?
That's right. I'd love to invite you to Minnesota. Yeah, I mean, it's about valuing ethnic studies and getting the resources to support our intellectuals. But I want to pick up on your point. I think there's a radical politics, a Chicano politics in the film that comes out, and I think you're also demonstrating it in the kind of artist that you are. I mean, the idea to kind of leave Hollywood and go back to the people, kind of a refusal to decenter, the most marginalized folks in our communities, right? Drug users, convicted ex-cons, convicts, so on, as gang members, so on and so forth. So I see that thread in the film, and I'm wondering, kind of, well, one, I don't think it's surprising that you mentioned that the Hispanic middle class didn't know what to do with that film, particularly in the early 1990s. You're seeing a kind of retreat from Chicano movement politics, I think.
Yeah.
It's being criticized for good reasons, but it's also being kind of, the baby's being thrown out with the bathwater, I think, as it's the decade of the Hispanic in the 80s. There's this idea about, climbing the ladder and being successful and the first, politician or the first this or that in business or whatnot. But I think that's why the film's so important in the 90s, because, again, it infuses us this critical politics to a new generation where that's not as available unless you're reading. And like you just said, many of our people are not reading this kinds of stuff. So film is a way that it becomes available, this kind of, celebration of the barrio, the celebration of being Mexican, this critique of colonialism that I think is in there. And so I just wondered, how you navigated that, if you had that in mind while you were doing that. One observation I made this round, again, watching it for the millionth time, I have to say, I've got a shout out to my brother-in-law, Raul Amador. He puts it on every time I visit Houston, where I'm from. If we're drinking, he turns it on at the end of the night to kind of wind things down. He turns on the movie. So I've seen it a million times. But in this watching of it, the character of Montana, right? I think I love that character, and it's tragic. It's a tragic story. I've circulated on the internet before where in one of the opening scenes where it shows Montana, he's reading Frantz Fanon. He's reading The Wretched of the Earth as he's chilling in La Onda spot in the prison or whatnot. And everybody loved him, and he tried to create black-brown unity against the white system. And of course, Onda has to rid of him because of the weakness and whatnot. Was the character of Montana kind of showing that radical Chicano politics was, I don't know, not possible in that space or on the decline? Or I wondered how you were kind of thinking about that character, because it's such an important character.
I think putting that book in his hands and having that poem on the wall to his daughter, I think sort of like T.S. Eliot said, if you're going to steal something from the house, bring a meat bone for the dog. I wanted the viewers to look at Montana and the way he spoke with integrity, and sort of unconsciously put the two together, that he must be so smart because he's literary. And so I put those two in there. I could have put naked girls on the wall, or I could have put another book in his hand, but I did that in the same way that I opened up the film with the Aztec, with the Matachin dancers. And that's to show that one of the themes running through it. And this is interesting too. Instead of aggrandizing it or sensationalizing it, I started with like one of the threads in the Navajo rug, the way the Navajos weave out here. They take the thread, and you see the design of the Navajo rug, which is the movie. Then you take one thread of the narrative and you pull it out, and you realize it goes back to the sheep grazing on the prairie. And then you realize that the sheep doesn't live unless it has Mother Earth to eat the plants and the grass from. Then you realize that the plants and the grass are important because the sheep wouldn't be alive if it didn't have those nutrients. And so in the movie, without actually being real specific about it, I tried to keep the sources of who we are in their primordial authenticity intact. I wanted to show them that we come from an ancient civilization. And I think Montana kind of reflected that he was part of that Mayan, Inca, Mexica, I think he showed that without mentioning it, except in the first opening scene. I think he showed the viewer that yo soy indígena, that I'm an indigenous man, without advertising it, And that gave him integrity, and that also gave his word sort of nobility, street cred nobility. Enough that people would follow him, And I wanted to connect literature with that, because to me that was important. So you have that one thread in the blanket that's the whole movie, and if you follow it out, you realize it leads to some sort of indigenous past, which is really good because it's what we thrive on. It's very strange that as the Chicano people from Houston, from all the way around, it's very strange that we really do carry our heritage, our legacy in our consciousness every day. That we know, in a deep sense, that we come from a place, that we are a people that are from, in New Mexico and Albuquerque and up north, we come from the Red Crane, the Seven Caves, and we always know that. We'll never forget that. We learn it with our catechism, Jesus was on the cross, but when Jesus went to meditate, he went to the Seven Cranes cave. We're like, where's that? Oh, that's where we come from as a people. Okay. So it's kind of interesting that here's the thing that bothers me that I tried to do in the movie was anything that was accomplished in the movie, I tried to counterpose it in its opposite form. Like if somebody knew how to read, I wanted to have somebody around that person who didn't know how to read. If somebody had accomplished something or achieved something, I wanted to have somebody who hadn't achieved anything. And people had to pick that up, but I was trying to counterbalance that throughout the movie. Like if you offer me an apple, and as Montana did in that thing, he says, no, I want his life. So it's interesting how I try to counterbalance Popeye, with Crucito. This guy is actually expressing something in a contributable form. And then you have this other guy who's just exploiting it, taking and taking. This was giving and giving. And it's true that a lot of people who give in service always end up suffering the most.
Jimmy, thank you. Like this has been amazing. Sitting here talking to you. I know you don't like podcasts, but I'm a huge fan, and I think Jimmy. I don't want to put words in Patiño's mouth as well, but this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jimmy. Appreciate you.
Hey, Patiño, email me. Let me see who you are up there. Tell me what's going on up there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jimmy. Appreciate you.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Jimmy.